Let's kick things off. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we continue our Modern Collaboration Improving Talk series with our guest of honor, Josh Loftus. My name is Armando Lopez, and I am a talent management specialist out of the Improving Mexico Enterprise, and I am thrilled to welcome you today. And now, speaking of our guest of honor, Josh, he has been at Improving and in the industry for the past 4 years, working with clients like U Chicago Medicine as a developer, specializing in cloud development with or for Microsoft's tech stack, including but not limited to the Power Platform, Fabric, SharePoint, Dynamics, and Azure. In his free time, he plays soccer, video games, and travels. I am thrilled to welcome you today, my friend Josh, with your webinar, Building a Line of Business Application with Microsoft 365. Microsoft 365 provides a new option in the classic buy versus build conversation, the ability to configure the out-of-the-box platform to deliver business functionality. In today's session, Josh will illustrate through a case study how a manufacturing firm used Modern SharePoint, Power Automate, and Syntex to deliver a contract management system that seamlessly integrates with their existing collaboration platform. Before we start, I encourage you to use our Q&A feature so you can ask him questions, which I will be sure to send his way. And now, to talk about this and much more, I welcome you, Josh Loftus. The microphone is yours.
Thank you, Armando, for that introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our Next Level Modern Collaboration series. Today, we will be discussing how we build a line of business application with Microsoft 365. A little background, of course, Armando did a great intro of me, but here's a title slide saying where I'm from. I'm a senior consultant from the Chicago office. I enjoy traveling and visiting new places, and my favorite meal is a steak with blue cheese. As Armando mentioned, I've been a part of Improving for the last 4 years, and in that time, I've had the opportunity to work with almost every Microsoft tool and platform. I personally have found tremendous value in their middle ground approach to customization only when needed. I'm hoping that by the end of this hour, you will feel the same way too. Our agenda today kicks off with interpreting the business needs. This is how we took our case study's ambitious must-haves and leveraged the out-of-the-box Microsoft functionality to meet them. Next up, we will be generating the technical design, where I explain how the different tools in the solution interact. After that, we'll take a 10,000-foot view of how the solution was built and what specific criteria each of the tools satisfied. Finally, we'll be discussing Microsoft's Edge and the fast-paced development environment we find ourselves in as consultants and employees alike. At the end, we will be doing a demo of the contract lifecycle management system in SharePoint. First up, interpreting the business needs. So our case study was creating a contract lifecycle management system for a mid-sized manufacturing company. They had roughly 2,000 users, and their decision to buy versus build a contract management system came down to a few key factors. First off, they had no internal developers, which made it impossible for them to build the platform internally without hiring outside help. And second, this system that we were building was mission critical for their business needs, so it was a priority. But despite this, their budget was very lean, so buying a solution would be out of the question. On top of this issue, pre-built tools are expensive and inflexible. The client's current and future pain points, well, first off, the main one was that nothing of this sort existed in their system. There was no centralized storage of active or archived contracts. They were actually being saved to separate employees' personal OneDrives. Because of this, there was no version histories for contracts, even that they did have stored somewhere. Also, they had no storage for the related exhibits and documents that backed the majority of their contracts. And at the end of the day, their compliance department was unable to even meet their internal standards, much less an external audit. That being said, all 5 goals detailed in the visual on the right were not met, and most of them didn't exist in any fashion yet. So it was a full ground-up build. So now the classic question, to buy or build your tools. So Microsoft provides a new option in the classic buy versus build conversation, the ability to configure the out-of-the-box platform to deliver business functionality rapidly. To put the cost in perspective, to build a custom solution for this same client would have cost them roughly $150,000. it will have required around 5 times the development time to achieve similar functionality. This means it's a higher development cost, which was untenable for the client, and they needed this process built yesterday. For the buy option, on the other hand, it would have cost them roughly $350 per user per year to meet all their requirements, or a minimum of $60 per user per year, but this came with no specialized tooling included. The middle ground approach, our approach, is where the highest ROI exists, with one developer, one project manager, and one solution architect. In 2 months and 275 hours, we built a solution that met all of their needs. The total cost came in just under $30,000. Using Microsoft's tools, we were able to satisfy their urgent need and still come in miles beneath what it would cost to buy or build alike. Now, moving on to the client's expected functionality. First off, they required a way to manage their contracts from all 21 departments across multiple countries in a holistic one-stop shop way. Starting with the creation step, they needed to field contract requests from non-legal users and also supply their savvy users with curated contract templates administered by the legal team. This was key to offloading some of the burden from the legal team, who had been trying and failing to maintain and keep up with all of their company's contract requests. Then, leading into the collaboration portion on said contracts, this included communicating with their peers, fellow department users, their internal counsel and legal team, and also the external counterparties. Next, they needed the ability for role-based progression, where certain job titles gave users exclusive permission to either progress or revert a contract status and update the contract's metadata or contents. Finally, they needed a central repository for their active and archived contracts that also notifies users of important dates like the activation date, the expiration date, or when a price changes. Previously, they had no visibility into any of this. So now, here's a general overview of the tools that we mapped to their requirements. As you can see, SharePoint and Power Automate cover a majority of the requirements and act as the glue for the solution. Other tools, like Teams, Syntex, and Adobe Sign, were included to meet specific needs that were expressed by the business or its users. We were able to use these extra tools with little cost because Microsoft has prioritized making their tools integrate seamlessly and by bundling their licensing. Now, on to the next section, generating the technical design. Because Microsoft empowers developers to create quickly, it is even more imperative that you measure twice and cut once. Use the tools to develop quicker, but you still develop smart. This diagram is a great example of how architecting the solution to match your tools can reduce the tech debt created to achieve the same goals. Our client's decision point was to keep a centralized versus decentralized contract repository. The decision had a ripple effect that could have greatly inflated the number of Power Automate workflows if the client wanted every department to collect unique data points, i.e., the decentralized contract repository approach. As you can see, while there were some pros to a decentralized structure, the cost to create 43 compared to 162 flows would have more than doubled their budget for very little return on investment. One of their goals was to standardize their data gathering process. And so by bending to certain parts of the business, they would have actually been doing more harm than good for their organization in the long run. Now, here is our approach for the architecture of the centralized repository. Note that minimal flows are detailed in the department site section. This is because of one of the oddities of flows, having to be isolated to a single list or library in SharePoint. This was a key factor in how we decided to move away from a decentralized repository and what would have caused that great inflation in the number of flows we had to create, maintain, and update. This diagram also details how the contracts would move between the contract hub and the child department sites. Finally, it shows how other tools like Syntex and Adobe Sign and Microsoft Forms would connect to other parts of the system, once again seamlessly, because Microsoft has prioritized creating integrations between all of the tools and platforms that they create. Now, the diagram you're looking at is part 3, or a 3-part diagram that you'll see over the next 3 slides, broken into 3 key pieces. This diagram was originally created to clarify and standardize their business process, which, as I previously mentioned, was not documented, was not standardized, and there was no common place to leave your active or archived contracts. So the business owners had no visibility into what contracts their company was legally on the hook for, especially when it came to their operations outside the United States. So a key piece of this solution was the idea that as a contract matured, it would be passed to people with increasing expertise and authority. That is expressed in this diagram as the top half green being the authority/experts, and the bottom blue half being their boots on the ground department users. Each contract starts and originates from a department site. And as the details and metadata are refined, it progresses through the multiple stages before being either approved or denied by the department head. If it is approved, it moves on to the next step, which we'll detail in the next slide. But if it's denied, the status is reverted back and users are notified that more work is required for this contract to be signed. Next up, the legal team business process. This portion of the business process is the main way legal and department users communicate back and forth. Once the department head approves his employee's work, it gets sent to the hub site where only legal and management have access to it. That was a key piece of it because as a contract got closer to being sent out, we wanted to decrease the volatility of the details of that contract as much as possible. And so trusting it in the hands of the business owners and the legal team was the safest bet. Now back to the process. Depending on if legal finds the contract details and metadata to be complete in this middle step, they can either This communication was also done through Teams, but an integrated way that we let them communicate was directly in the Word documents by leaving comments or redlining. The last stage of their business process was the execution of a contract that they deemed to be prepared and verbose enough for them to sign off on. This last portion only occurs after the department users, department head, and legal team have approved the contract. At this stage, the contract approval form gets sent from SharePoint to Adobe Sign for their management team to sign off on. After all signatures have been collected, Power Automate saves the signed approval form and sends out the contract to the internal and counterparty signers detailed in the contract's metadata. After all signatures have been collected on the contract, Power Automate saves the signed contract to the centralized contract repository on the hub site. It then marks the contract as active and notifies the appropriate users that it has been completed, whether that be the contract owner, legal team, or accounting department. Finally, after a certain amount of time, an active contract will eventually, of course, become inactive or archived in our case. 60 days before this date is met, it notifies the contract owner that this contract will soon be marked as inactive, and they either need to renew it or prepare to be without it. If no action is taken after 60 days, it moves the contract to the archived contract repository. The archived contract repository was important to expedite the business's meta-gathering strategy, in that as they start to store more and more of their contracts, they should be able to reuse and repurpose existing ones. And by using our renewal process, they are able to essentially copy paste the key pieces of metadata from the archived contract to a new contract in a department site so that they don't need to enter that data twice, and they make sure they maintain consistency across the contracts that they are sending out and signing. Now, building the solution.
Yeah, I already got one sent through Teams, Josh. It says, speaking of the generating technical design, how did you combine the general requirements of a CLM system with the client's specific needs?
Yes, okay. That's a great question. So that abstract 5 key points of this contract lifecycle management system mixed with what their internal users needed was done by starting informed on what a standard contract lifecycle management process was and detailed, but then having specific working sessions with their key users like department heads or legal team to figure out how they operated on a day-to-day basis, and then combine all of their internal approach and blend that with the idealistic version of a contract lifecycle management system to come up with our final solution. So we filled in pieces from their bespoke process, and also we backfilled some of their missing pieces using our prior knowledge of contract lifecycle management. So a key piece of this was obviously collaboration. First, the client partitioned their users into Teams channels to keep sensitive contracts protected. This was also another step between siloing their employees so that they had to do less legwork when it came to permissioning specific documents. Next, they communicated about status updates using group and personal messaging. Your coworker to the answer, or something that at least point you to someone who knew the answer. Finally, the next core requirement sounds similar to the previous slide, but is a slight difference, was document-specific collaboration. To create and redline contracts, the client used Word's integration with SharePoint, specifically Word Online. And a key addition was leveraging that tool, which allowed users to co-author documents and also redline them simultaneously and enter contract metadata all in that single app. Word also allowed users to create inline comments and tag teammates with questions, comments, or concerns, similar to how Teams messaging operates. And as you can see in the visual at the bottom there. Luckily, this was once again provided out of the box with Word. And most importantly, it maintained the contract's version history for both the internal and external redlining, even when two documents are merged. So the change in quality of life the business saw directly was that they used to not have any paper trail of how a document or a contract was generated and who took part in it. Now they even have external information about how their counterparties are editing and working with documents. Next up, we used Power Automate frequently throughout the solution. Like I said previously, it was truly the connective tissue for this contract lifecycle management system. Key metadata fields on each contract coordinated and automated their flexible business process. Also, flows were abstracted for usability across all departments, which was only possible because of our forward thinking regarding the central repository that we had previously discussed. That abstraction of those department flows was key to maintain consistency in the business process and specifically Outlook notifications sent to users. In the client situation, this reduced their Power Automate footprint tremendously and also reduced the cost for us to go in and update text, labeling, or steps in the process. Because instead of going to 21 separate flows for each separate department, we were able to go to one centralized flow that had all of the logic for that step of the process. For specific contract statuses, we only allowed certain job titles to make edits to the contract and its metadata. For instance, at the requires department head approval stage, whether it be a logical issue or a term that they didn't want to agree to, that their legal team specifically was unaware of. And so by locking down the security, by using SharePoint's natural groups, along with Teams natural groups and Entra, as we'll go on to discuss here in a minute, as it came in or was created. And importantly, we also included specific links to the current contract included, along with details about the contract's next step, as you can see in the visual. This was another step we took towards truly integrating the change control, change management, just general information about how the system and process works, and putting that at the forefront so users have to read it, absorb it, and follow it. Finally, a big part of Power Automate, or a big win that comes automatically with Power Automate, is that it's hosted in the cloud and scales automatically. It also keeps a run history, the ability to rerun failed attempts, and sends IT admins a recap email weekly showing which, if any, flows had failed runs. Now, for the most exciting part, AI. But in all seriousness, I am sure Microsoft knocked it out of the park with Syntex. In my mind, for context, this client was currently engaged in and required a lot of contracts for their business to function. This created a major bottleneck. Employees, on one hand, didn't have time to curate all 50-ish data points the business needed for their currently active contracts that we injected in the system on creation. This type of work was daunting to the average user. Now, with minimal setup and seed data, the client utilized Syntex to extract metadata from documents with similar structure and formatting. This infinitely enhanced their business process because now the users only need to review and refine the automatically extracted metadata. My personal favorite part of Microsoft Syntex is the transparency, and that comes in the form of the confidence rating, as you can see in the lower right visual on the last column. This confidence rating is administered by the AI extracted data points and was provided so the legal team could identify contracts that would require more attention and curation on their part. Whereas if this contract template has been seen many times previously, that confidence score would be higher because it knows exactly where data points have been confirmed to exist. The client used SharePoint lists and libraries and sites in general to store contracts. Uploading a document to SharePoint Online stores it in the cloud where it is easily accessible by any user who has access to that list or library. This seamlessly integrates with Word Online to let you upload, co-author, and securely store documents from the cloud. SharePoint views and forms can also be customized multiple different ways depending on the complexity of items you're working with. Filter, group by, and formatting using JSON for view customization. And Microsoft Forms, Power Apps, and SPFX are all different tiers of complexity that you can use to customize your item forms. SharePoint also has a multi-tiered recycling bin to avoid documents from being lost when accidentally deleted by users. That was another key piece given to us by the client, that they had a few horror stories of a mix of active contracts and currently in progress contracts getting lost in the ether, whether it be in a chain of Outlook emails or just on someone's OneDrive. And that was a tremendous amount of work lost. Finally, like Word, SharePoint document metadata comes with version history by default, both of which were must-haves for the client's risk management department. So as you can see in the visual, you are able to revert to a different version of the item, also without impacting the actual document. This is specifically for the metadata associated with it. And you're also able to see who and when modified the file. Now, moving on to discuss Adobe Sign's features we utilized. Users initiated the signing process by updating the contract statuses in SharePoint, and Power Automate automatically sends off the document with its supporting exhibits to the intended users, which have been already captured in the metadata. Customizable signing order notifies users when it is their turn to sign the document and doesn't bother them before or after that. Contract owners, on the other hand, will be notified when the process is complete And then the signed document is saved from the Adobe Sign Cloud to the central SharePoint contract repository and linked to the unsigned document that has all of the version changes. This is done, once again, automatically using Power Automate. And a small note here, while Adobe Sign is a key part of their process, we were able to minimize the burden of using this third-party signing tool by removing the need for them to interact with it directly. And thus, there was no need for their users to learn another UI. They just need to know our internal process, and Power Automate was able to obfuscate any Adobe Sign Cloud operations that users would need to do. We gave them the ability to send, cancel, pause contracts, all built into SharePoint without leaving that single SharePoint list. Now for the behind the scenes. Using this was a no-brainer because the client was already using this tool to administer their Microsoft licenses, as most do, I'll note. So it was truly plug and play. We were able to leverage it for this project and get tremendous value out of it without doing any legwork ourselves. Like I mentioned, we had some key functionality based on stuff like job titles. The department sites were administered directly based off the information stored in Entra. However, frankly, I almost omitted this tool from the presentation because it doesn't have much flashy functionality. However, that doesn't mean it isn't a powerhouse out of the box and fill in some fundamental gaps in most organizations. SharePoint and Teams can also combine with Entra well because they both support custom permission models by asset. So like I mentioned, the security model we were using was first, that got you access to the site, but then certain practices could only be done by people with specific job titles, like department heads. And then also there were a few lists and libraries, as shown in the visual below there, that had specific permissions where even though a user has access to the site, we may not want them to be able to go in and edit, for instance, their contract templates. Only legal should be able to do that. And so you're able to create this nested tiering system for how you administer and manage permissions. And all of this can also be done using groups as well. So it is not a one-off user by user. Oh, we got a new person in this department, so we need to go manually add them to this site and then also the list and then make sure they have access to Adobe Sign. It is truly a one-stop shop that did a lot of legwork for us. Finally, these days we do take it for granted, but it's ready to go multi-factor authentication, and the mobile app is what allows for users to securely log in from anywhere and on any device. This is only going to get more and more important as mobile first becomes common, specifically in Microsoft, but industry-wide in general. Now, last but not least, handling change management for a client with users that had little to no experience in a contract lifecycle management system. Frankly, it was a pretty daunting task. It was incorporating department users into a very, very intricate, specific business process that was also legally binding. So we were dealing with such a broad spectrum of users. This process needed to support people ranging from the client's best legal minds to their newest interns. To bridge this gap in knowledge, we surfaced documentation early and often in both Teams and SharePoint, and then also injected it directly into our notifications we sent out through Outlook. A step further that we went from the traditional FAQ, as you can see on the right, was on the left-hand side using SPFX, which is essentially React and TypeScript in SharePoint. We were able to create a dynamic guide where users could, at the very top there, select which contract on their relative site would they like to see the current status of, and what their options are for either progressing the contract forward or backward. You'll also note there that a few key details are included, like who the expected actors are for this current, previous, and next step. And also, in the bottom left, those big yellow warnings. There were a few parts of this process that we felt we wanted to make users aware of, even though, oh, they should be aware of it. Well, we really wanted to shove it in front of their face because there was a few operations where either data could be lost if it was done at an inopportune time, or a contract could accidentally be progressed when people didn't mean it to be. And so really describing the value and cost of progressing a contract through all of our statuses was clearly defined here. And then we defined the general specifications in something a little more lo-fi, like the FAQ there, or a Teams wiki. Okay, next up is Microsoft's Edge. Apology for the pun, but before we dive into this, um, any questions in the docket?
Pun. Yeah, I already have a couple of questions lined up for you. First up is, why would you build in Power App instead of using a custom form or MS Forms?
So why would you use a Power App instead of a custom form? So what I'm gleaning from your comment was that uh, you were thinking we were doing a full-fledged Power App. What I was recommending was you can extend a form specifically using a Power App. So it isn't a Power App whole, or it isn't completely a Power App, but rather an embedded single Power App that's simplified and isolated to a single list item type.
Thank you, Josh. And before you move on to the next section, someone's asking, how did you completely remove the need for users to go to Adobe Sign Cloud?
Yeah, so that was thanks to Microsoft has done a tremendous job creating connectors with third-party tools. And so there is already a built-in integration with Adobe Sign Cloud to hook into some key events throughout their process of gathering signatures and sending those into our realm. And then we get to handle those events and pull data from their cloud services when we need to. And so we were able to control the entire Adobe Sign process by using a drop-down field for statuses on each contract.
Cool stuff. Thank you, Josh.
Without further ado, we'll get into Microsoft's Edge. So some of the general platform benefits you'll feel if you decide to use or join the Microsoft ecosystem. First off, of course, it's familiar. Microsoft is everywhere. I'm sure we have all come across it and used one of their tools at some point. Most of us use them every day. On top of this, it's familiar, but you also get to reuse existing licensing on a platform with tools that users already understand. And so it's familiar, but it's also, you're also able to reuse your experiences with some of their tools, with the rest of their tools as you explore more and more of the Microsoft technologies. Next up, I mentioned this multiple times already, but it is cloud first, and that is a direction most businesses are trying to head. And like I mentioned, that will be only more prevalent as people are going to mobile first approaches and are needing to access their data from multiple different points. Also, of course, teamwork. Like I said, it is very easy to reference, comment, tag people in posts, whether it be in a SharePoint comments form, a Teams channel, Teams chat, Teams group, Outlook. It is very, very easy to communicate with coworkers and even external contacts using the Microsoft platform. Next up, a lot of the legwork and connectivity is already built for you using Microsoft. And so that helps you organize your work process and flow and not have to manage as much of the communication in between the different tools you're using. So this makes you or leaves you with clearer, more consistent steps, data points, and easy automation to help users stay on the correct path. And then finally, the look and feel. A lot of clients request some type of branding to make something feel their own. That makes complete sense. And SharePoint, Teams, everything in Microsoft is very easy to create a general theme, specifically color, image, stuff like that. For instance, a SharePoint site, and then apply that globally to every other point of entry you have, whether that be Teams, Outlook, or Power Automate. Now, onto the general value proposition that we think you get out of using Microsoft 365 components. Well, first off, it's very easy and you can do it very quickly, build useful tools for essential business processes. They have done a great job of making things abstract enough to apply to almost any situation. I have used this same tech stack to solve at minimum 4 to 5 different projects, all of which leverage things in different but similar ways. As I've also noted, a lot of these tools that I've talked about have low skill barrier for development and use. That skill barrier is even further decreased by the tutorials that Microsoft releases and also their uh, documentation that they have on their MSDYN site. Next up, it's a easy, seamless way to introduce your client to AI. Like I said, it's all the rage these days. And so getting value out of AI for a low cost and easy to use way um, holds a lot of value. Another thing is that a majority of their apps, if not all of them, are mobile ready by default. So something like SharePoint is very easy to access remotely. Um, Also, all of this, since you're able to build it so quickly, it's a fairly modest investment, especially considering a majority of the clients we come in contact with already have the licenses for these tools bundled up in their general M365 E3 or E5 licenses, but they're just not utilizing them like they could be. And so there's a lot of value being left on the table. And then finally, I've said this before, I'd say it again, Microsoft does a great job of connecting all of their tools, building integrations and making them easy to use so you don't have to deal with as much of the overhead that us developers are or have become accustomed to. And usually getting a proof of concept of something just simply connecting is a big win. Whereas using Microsoft tools, that is just kind of standard. And then you can jump right into the business process users or all that stuff. Finally, this solution was modular by design. And so I mentioned that I've used these tools previously in other engagements, but even for this one and for those other ones, it holds true. Um, there is multiple tiers based on the complexity of customization you need. These low to no code tools aren't the only avenue. They are a very easy way to show a quick ROI to clients and get them to buy in and start using this stuff. And then as they want more and more business specific changes, you're able to lean into more technical stuff. A common progression I bring people through is the out of the box SharePoint forms. Then the next layer of that is Microsoft Forms. And then deeper than that is the Power Apps forms that you can create for SharePoint lists and libraries. And then a step deeper than that even is SPFX forms, where you can create full-fledged, essentially React-based web forms that can be much more dynamic, styled much more intricately. So now moving on to the demo. Here we go. So this is our starting point. The sample department I drew up was the logistics department. Some of these visuals on the homepage are just closer to stock images for demo purposes. This area is usually where clients like to make it look and feel like their own and truly bring it into whatever previous website or technology they have circulated throughout their organization. But like I mentioned, every contract starts in a department, and that can come in 2 fashions. You can either request a contract using a form that will then notify the legal team with the details of your request, and then they will supply a contract to your collaboration library and mark your request complete when done, and then you will be notified when your contract is ready. Another way that we are able to start off a contract is the curated templates that the legal team has created and generated for users who are a little more savvy, who know what they're looking for, what type of contract they need, to go in, pull those down, and then upload themselves to the collaboration library, which is what I did for the sake of time for the demo. So as you can see, I navigate to what's called the collaboration library in the department. And this is where the entire department will be working on contracts that are still in those early stages of development. And so this is when you are figuring out who internally will be working on it. As users are added as internal collaborators, they will get an email notification, once again, with a link directly to this item for clarity's sake. So they're aware that they're expected to be working on these contracts. So now the initial state of all contracts is in progress. And so in the in progress state, we would expect users to be in here editing metadata, which I already started to enter. And a little side note here, for the sake of the demo purposes, I am under multiple roles in this. And so I am the primary business contact, an internal collaborator. I'm also the external signer, just so I can really show you guys all the notifications and steps in the process that the organization as a whole would go through. Whereas in reality, there would be separate people where there would be a separate department head, there would be lower level users collaborating internally on this, and then there'd be a primary business contact or owner who would be owning the contract. And then, of course, the legal team on top of that is another entity outside them. But like I mentioned, in this initial stage, users would be entering metadata, or it would be initially seeded by their use of Syntex based on the contract edits that have been made. So they can be in here editing the metadata, or they can directly go in and edit the contract here too. And so if I go in here and make a couple sample edits, you'll notice that redlining or change review is automatically turned on. So everyone in the group needs to either like confirm or approve an update made so things don't accidentally slip through the cracks. Another feature we discussed was the ability to tag people. So I'll tag myself. And then there's also this feature to assign to someone. And so not only can you tag someone with a specific comment, but if you include an action item, you are able to directly assign it to them. And then it's marked as something that they need to mark as complete when it is done. So after we went in here and made these edits, oh, there we go, taskbar on the way. Okay, so we edited our contract, left a comment or two. Now say we are ready to progress it. Actually here, can I give us a quick refresh? So now that me and my internal coworkers have begun entering metadata and also started filling in details of the contract, we can progress this to the next stage, which is ready for department head. So now what's happening behind the scenes is Power Automate is figuring out which user is marked as the logistics department head. They are then notified that their input is required for this contract, once again, with the context of this contract included in that notification. So they will receive an email with a link specifically here, so it's not sifting through a bunch of different sites, lists, and libraries trying to figure out, okay, I got this notification email telling me I need to do something. Now, what do I actually need to do? It brings them directly here to avoid confusion. And then, so now, since I'm playing all these roles, I'm going to go in and say, yep, this contract is looking good. I think it's ready for legal to start reviewing it. So now, this part of the process does take a minute or two to run, but that's only because of the logic that's backing it. And I'll expand on that really quickly. So we gave them the ability to associate external contacts, related documents, stuff like that, all are linked to this item using lookup fields. And so when a contract moves from a department site to now that's ready for legal, it's going to be moving to the hub site for legal to begin working on it. All of those related assets travel with it, but also importantly, for stuff like external contacts and counterparties, it double checks to see if they already exist in the hub site. So they now have a full catalog without duplicates, importantly, of people that they've done business with that they can continue to leverage and easily fill in metadata going forward in the future. So instead of typing in just a raw string of someone's email, you now have bundled together their name, company, email address, job title, and location. So now let's see. So while that is loading and moving in the background, this is our next site. This is what's referenced as the hub site. And so very soon that contract will land here in the pending library. This is the beginning of the process for the legal team. Here we go. So now it is no longer in the logistics department, but now it's been moved. And so importantly, department users no longer really have access to edit it, the metadata or the document itself. And so it's maturing. And so therefore, now only management and the legal team are able to edit it and either progress it or push it backwards. For the sake of a quick demo, I'll then say legal reviewed it and we approved it. Looks good. What this kicks off then is in the background, Power Automate is once again gathering all the related information, supporting documents, counterparties, and then is beginning to communicate with the Adobe Sign Cloud and begin gathering signatures on either the approval form if it's required, or directly going to signing the contract with internal and external users. So this is the stage where it's highlighted that there is no need for users to be in the Adobe Sign Cloud. That is taken completely out of their hands. All they need to do is know which status they need to set it to and the criteria that need to be met before they set it to that status. Once again, there is a lot of legwork going on behind the scenes with Power Automate. This may take a moment to communicate with the Adobe Sign Cloud because that also has pretty high latency. And I know we're nearing the end time. Okay, so this is currently running. It's at minute 1.5 of a 4-minute process. And so we may not be able to see the end result of this. But before we let people go, last name looks familiar. My older brother is actually doing our next modern collaboration series on Power Pages. So tune in, that will be a great presentation. And then Rob is back on the 23rd doing another improving talk about cloud native projects with Planner. So thank you guys all for attending. Thank you guys for taking the time. Hopefully you learned something and enjoyed learning about some of the Microsoft tools.